Why Japanese people stopped wanting more and got richer. At some point in the 1990s, something strange happened in Japan. The economy collapsed. The stock market lost nearly half its value in a single year. Real estate prices fell so sharply that properties bought at the peak would not recover their value for 3 decades. Companies that had seemed invincible, household names, symbols of Japanese industrial pride, quietly disappeared. And then, something even stranger happened. The people adapted. Not by working harder, not by spending more to stimulate the economy, the way governments urged them to, not by chasing the version of success they had been handed before the collapse. They simply stopped wanting what they had been told to want. And in that stopping, in that quiet, collective, almost invisible act of refusal, something remarkable began to grow. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Japan was before the fall. In the 1980s, Japan was the closest thing to economic invincibility the modern world had ever seen. Its companies were buying American landmarks. Its cars dominated global roads. Its technology was setting the standard for what the future would look like. A Japanese salary worker in Tokyo in 1987 could reasonably believe that tomorrow would be larger than today, that the next apartment would be bigger, the next car newer, the next generation wealthier. This was the promise, and for a remarkable stretch of time, it was kept. Then it wasn't. The asset bubble burst. The promise evaporated, and a generation of Japanese people were left holding the ruins of an ambition that had been handed to them by their culture, their employers, their government, an ambition they had never fully chosen for themselves. What they did next defines everything that follows. They did not replace one ambition with another. They did not pivot to a new vision of success, repackaged and relaunched with fresh branding. They did not do what most cultures do in the aftermath of economic trauma, which is to grieve briefly, then resume consuming in a slightly different direction. Instead, a significant portion of Japanese society did something that the modern economic system has no category for. They questioned the wanting itself. Not dramatically. Not as a political movement or a philosophical manifesto, but quietly, personally, at the level of individual daily life, millions of people began asking a question that consumer capitalism is architecturally designed to prevent you from asking. Is more actually better? There is a generation in Japan that researchers began calling the Satori Sedai, the enlightened generation. Young people who, coming of age in the shadow of the collapse, developed a relationship with desire that their parents' generation would have found bewildering. They didn't want big cars. Many didn't want cars at all. They didn't aspire to large homes. They were indifferent to luxury brands in a country where luxury brands had once been a primary language of social status. They married later, or not at all. They consumed less, traveled less, accumulated less. Economists called it a problem, a symptom of depression, of deflation, of a society that had lost its confidence and its appetite. But there was another way to read it entirely. These were not people who had given up. They were people who had looked clearly at what wanting had produced. In their parents' lives, in their national story, in the gap between the promise and the reality, and decided, rationally and without drama, that the equation didn't balance, that the cost of wanting more was, in many cases, higher than the value of what more actually delivered. This is not an abstract philosophical position. It has a name, and it is ancient. Chisoku, to know sufficiency. To understand with genuine clarity and not resignation that you already have enough. The concept appears in Taoist texts, in Buddhist teaching, in the quiet architecture of Japanese aesthetics that has always preferred the incomplete to the overwhelming, the suggestion to the declaration, the empty space to the crowded one. But in the aftermath of Japan's economic collapse, Shisoku stopped being a philosophical concept and became a practical survival strategy. And in becoming practical, it revealed something that philosophy had always suspected but economics had never been willing to admit. That the reduction of desire does not reduce well-being. That beneath a certain threshold, once genuine needs are met, once basic security exists, the accumulation of more things, more status symbols, more markers of arrival adds almost nothing to the actual texture of a lived life. The Japanese who stopped wanting more didn't become poorer in any way that mattered. They became, in the ways that are hardest to measure and most important to feel, considerably freer. But here is the part the story usually skips. They also quietly became wealthier. Not all of them, not uniformly. But the behavioral pattern that emerged from Japan's post-bubble decades produced a financial profile that looks, from the outside, almost paradoxical. People who spent less saved more. People who saved more accumulated assets. People who accumulated assets without the pressure of social comparison, without the constant drain of keeping up, upgrading, signaling, found that their financial position improved in a slow, steady, unglamorous way that the boom years, for all their noise, had never actually delivered. The reduction of desire, it turned out, was not an economic surrender. It was a form of financial intelligence so counterintuitive that it cannot be packaged and sold, because its entire mechanism depends on rejecting the act of packaging and selling. You cannot market minimalism without destroying it. You cannot monetize the decision to stop consuming without the decision itself becoming a product. Japan's quiet revolution was immune to commercialization precisely because it lived at the level of personal values, not lifestyle trends. Consider what changes when you genuinely stop wanting more. You stop spending to impress people whose opinions you are not entirely sure you value. That single change, applied consistently, eliminates an enormous category of expenditure that most people in most modern societies carry without ever examining it. You stop upgrading things that already work. The phone that functions becomes sufficient. The car that runs becomes enough. The apartment that shelters becomes a home rather than a temporary address on the way to a better one. And each of these non-upgrades is money that stays. You stop needing a higher income to maintain your quality of life, which means you have options that people locked into the cycle of earning more to spend more simply do not have. You can take a job you find meaningful over one that merely pays more. You can work fewer hours. You can stop. You begin to experience what economists almost never model, and psychologists have been trying to explain for decades, that freedom from desire is not deprivation. It is, for many people, the closest thing to genuine wealth they have ever felt. There is a Japanese aesthetic concept called wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the elegance of the incomplete, the particular grace of things that are worn, weathered, simple, things that make no attempt to be more than what they are. A tea bowl that is slightly uneven, a garden that includes moss and shadow alongside the manicured elements, a room that contains 3 objects chosen carefully rather than 30 accumulated carelessly. Wabi-sabi is not poverty aestheticized. It is a trained eye, learning to see value where the market does not place it, learning to find beauty in sufficiency, learning that the thing which costs nothing, the quality of light in the late afternoon, the sound of rain on a wooden floor, the particular silence of a household after dinner, is often the thing that makes a day worth having lived. This is not a decorating philosophy. It is a financial philosophy in disguise, because the person who can find beauty in simplicity does not need to purchase beauty. The person who can find contentment in what already exists does not need to constantly acquire what doesn't yet. And the person who is not driven by the gap between what they have and what they desire is, in the most practical financial sense, in an extraordinarily powerful position. They are not subject to the mechanism that drives most modern spending. They have, quietly and without announcement, opted out. None of this is a prescription. Japan's post-bubble decades carried real suffering, real unemployment, real anxiety, real families who lost real savings. The Satori generation's relationship with desire was shaped in part by genuine scarcity and genuine disappointment. There is nothing romantic about economic collapse, but inside the suffering, something was learned. Something that the boom years, for all their glittering promise, had not been able to teach. That the pursuit of more is not neutral. It has a cost that never appears on the receipt. It costs attention, the constant low-level hunger of wanting, the mental bandwidth consumed by comparing and coveting and planning the next acquisition. It costs time, the extra hours worked to fund a lifestyle built on needs that were constructed by other people. And it costs, perhaps most expensively, the present moment. The life that is actually happening right now in the spaces between wanting. The Japanese people who stopped wanting more did not arrive at some perfect, enlightened existence. They remained ordinary people navigating ordinary difficulties. But they reclaimed something the boom had taken from them without asking. They reclaimed their own standard of enough. Somewhere in Japan right now, there is a person in a small apartment. The apartment contains what is needed and very little else. There is food in the kitchen that will be fully used. There's money in a savings account that has grown slowly, without drama, for years. There is no debt. There is no particular ambition to move somewhere larger, to drive something newer, to own something that the person next door does not already own. From the outside, from inside the logic of a system built entirely on the premise that more is the destination and wanting is the engine, this life looks like failure, like giving up, like a story that stopped before the good part. But from the inside, it feels like something the modern world has almost entirely forgotten how to name. It feels like enough, and enough, it turns out, genuinely felt, deeply understood, chosen freely rather than resigned to, is one of the most radical and most liberating forms of wealth that a human life can hold. The Japanese didn't stop wanting more because they lost. They stopped because they finally understood what winning actually cost. And in that understanding, they found something the boom years never offered. They found peace with what they already had. And quietly, without anyone noticing, that peace became the foundation of everything.